Good evening, everyone. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us this evening for this applicants event for the history course. So we're just going to make a start straight away. So I'm just going to start off before we begin by introducing myself. So my name is Claire Holliss and I'm the head of history at the college. So just to quickly go through the other members of staff at the college in our department. So I teach alongside three other members of staff in the history department. So there's Jack, Kate and Jim. And we all teach multiple courses. So if you do come and join us, then you're going to be taught by one of us, probably multiple, many of us as well. Okay, so just to quickly talk about the aims of the evening and what we're going to be doing in this session. So I'm going to start off with just a little introduction to the history A-level courses that we do. I'm going to particularly focus on the differences between the two courses because I know we've got a lot of questions about which one to go for there. I'm going to talk to you about things like destinations, results, where our students go on to when they finish their two-year course with us, and to answer any questions that you have. We're also going to have a little bit of a sort of sample lesson that will give you an idea about what sort of things we do in a standard history lesson at the college. Just quickly before we begin and before I start going through some of the information, you can ask questions at any point during the presentation. Can you please make sure you do that in the Q&A area rather than the chat? I'm going to ask you guys to use the chat at various points in the sample lesson that we do, so it might get a bit confusing if we're putting in lots of questions in there as well. So please just use the Q&A function and whenever the question pops into your head, and then we'll have some time at the end of the session where I can just have a look through them and answer any of those questions that come up there. Okay, so without further ado, let's have a start on talking about the history course. So the first thing to talk about is the fact that we've got two history courses at the college. So we offer an early modern history course and a modern history course. So the first thing to clarify here is that these courses are run by the same exam board. They have the same style of exam paper at the end of the 2 years. They're assessed using the same kind of mark schemes. So there's no, for example, no course that would be easier or harder than the others. They're identical in that respect. So what that means really is that you guys can choose whichever one you want to go for, depending upon what sounds most interesting to you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to talk you through the different courses or different units in each of the courses, just to give you a bit of an idea about what that might involve. So the first option then is our option one, the struggle for supremacy and equality, which is our early modern course, which involves our Tudors and French Revolution units, and a coursework now on civil rights. It's actually in the UK now. It says on USA on the screen, but that's now changed. And then option two, we've got our modern course, which has our British Empire and Cold War examined units, and then we have our coursework unit. Again, this is going to be back actually on British history, looking at voting and workers' rights. I'll talk you through that in a bit more detail in a moment. So let's just quickly talk about our first option, the early modern course. So the two examined units are our breadth study and our depth study. So the breadth study is called that because it covers a longer period of time, so over 100 years of history. And this would count for 40% of the overall A-level. In terms of the topics we cover here in the Tudors course, we run from the accession of Henry VII, so his victory at the Battle of Bosworth, through the course of his reign, how he consolidates his power. We then cover the reign of Henry VIII, and the big thing we look at there is the Reformation. So how Henry VIII breaks with Rome, establishes his own church, and all the fallout from that follows. We then look at what we call the mid-Tudor crisis, so the period of Edward and Mary, where they are variously either advancing the Reformation or trying to reverse it and bring back Catholicism, and some of the rebellions that happen during their reigns, before finishing by looking at the reign of Elizabeth I. So how she comes to the throne, how she tries to settle the religious question, then things like foreign policy, relationships with Spain, the Spanish Armada, Mary Queen of Scots, the plots against her, etc., through to the end of her reign and the end of the Tudor dynasty in 1603. So some of you might have covered bits of that before. I know quite a lot of people do things like the Elizabeth paper at GCSE, and you may well have covered things like Henry VIII lower in Key Stage 3, maybe in Year 8 or Year 9. So that'll be some familiarity for you there. The second examined unit is on the French Revolution. So this may be less familiar to you. Now, this is a shorter period of time, which we go into in a bit more depth. So we would look here at from 1774, when Louis XVI, the last proper king of France, kind of comes to the throne, look at how he falls from power and how France descends into revolution in 1789, and then look at all the various key events of the revolution before leading up to Napoleon Bonaparte's seizure of power and his rule as Emperor of France until 1815. So again, that might be slightly less familiar to you, but it's a very exciting unit there for you. Now, both of these, both of these courses end in the exam paper at the end of the 2 years. So you would have, for example, the Tudors paper, a question on historical interpretations and a couple of essay questions. Then in the French Revolution paper, you'd have a question on primary sources and a couple of essay questions. So you'd be developing some of the skills that you'd have at GCSE, but just building on them here for the A level as well. Now, in addition to the examined units, we have coursework here. So this coursework accounts for 20% of the overall A level. And what you would be producing here would be approximately a 3,500 word essay, which would include an essay, but also some coverage of primary sources and interpretations there. Now, again, we've got slightly the wrong topic on there, apologies for that. But those of you who were with us for the open evening will know we've just introduced a new coursework topic, which is on civil rights in the UK. So we'll be looking at very similar themes, but we're looking at the context in the UK, looking at particularly at the women's history, the Black British community, and the LGBTQ community in the 20th century there. Now, you might be wondering why we'd have a modern coursework here with the early modern examined units. That's because the exam board requires us to give you a big chronological breadth. So this would be a sort of a little, just to make sure you have some modern history in there as well. Okay, so that, again, the broad theme here is obviously looking at big themes like how individuals and groups seize power, how people fight for equality and rights, etc. Now, the second option, our modern option, has, again, 2 examined units and a coursework unit. So the 2 examined units are as follows. So the breadth study, so that bigger history paper on a longer period of time, covers the British Empire. So again, this might be less familiar to you. Obviously, you might have, it's not very much in the news at the moment. You might have encountered it. You may have covered it in your Key Stage 3 studies. It might have come up in some units for GCSE. So this British Empire unit goes from 1857, where the empire starts to go into an expansionist phase, through to 1967, by which point the empire has all but entirely disappeared. So you would look at, again, the first part goes up to sort of 1914. So you're looking essentially at questions of growth of the empire, how indigenous peoples resist imperial control, things like trade and commerce, things like development of nationalism, etc. in that period. And then in the second part of the paper, which you'd cover in your sort of second year, you look at the process of decolonisation. So how after World War I, the empire starts to collapse, and how that and the impact of that. And again, that is ending the examined paper, where you'd have an interpretations question and some essay questions there, and that'd be 40% of the A level. The second component is one which you might be more familiar with from your GCSE courses, and that is on the Cold War from 1945 to 1991, and that's also 40% of the A level. So that is, again, looking at the breakdown of the wartime Grand Alliance at the end of World War II, why the USA and the USSR end up sort of in conflict with each other, and then looking through and at key developments, things you might be familiar with already, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Vietnam War, but also some lesser known or less well covered events. So, for example, conflict in Central America, in Malaya, etc. In addition to what you might already have covered. And that, of course, will take you all the way up to 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet Union there. So very topical at the moment. And that would end with a depth study paper where you'd have, again, the question on primary sources and then the essay questions there. So in addition to that, you would also have coursework units. And again, so apologies, we've got the wrong course information there up. That is actually on voting and workers' rights in the UK. So this would be a slightly earlier period, looking at the end of the 18th century through the 19th century, how more and more people in Britain managed to get the right to vote, and how more groups emerged to represent working people in the UK, and how more and more rights were gained by those groups there. So again, sort of similar focus, similar themes coming through, but a slightly earlier period there. And again, that's 20% of your A level, and that you would involve writing a 3,500 word essay there. So again, this course is much more of an international focus, international conflict and how powers have shaped the world. Also a real focus on ideologies, so key ideas like communism, capitalism, imperialism, nationalism there as well. So the key thing about those two courses, flip back, is that as we said at the start, these two courses are identical in terms of how they're assessed. They're identical in the kinds of skills that you'll be developing. The thing that is different is the content. So that's the area where you'd have a slight difference there. So really, when I get asked which one should I go for, the main thing that I sort of say is which one interests you, because you're going to be studying one of these topics in quite a lot of depth over the 2 years. And so therefore it's really important that you find yourself interested in them. So don't just go for one, for example, because you might have already covered it, unless you've covered it and you find it really fascinating and want to look into it in a bit more depth there. Okay, so those are the two courses. Just to talk here about our extracurricular offers. Now, obviously, over the past few years, we've had this disrupted because of COVID, but we're beginning to be able to go back to our normal round of trips, and we hope, all things being well, that when you join us, we'll be able to run our normal residential trips once more. So we do run two major residential trips. The first is to Paris for the early modern course, and that's designed to support the French Revolution topic. The second is to Berlin, which is for the modern course to support the Cold War topic there. So those would be run in the summer term of your first year when you join us there, just before we break up for the summer holidays. We also run day trips. So we ran one recently to go to the exhibition on Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots at the British Library. We also have run trips in the past to Hampton Court, to the National Archives, etc. We're also running a new trip to support the coursework. So we're going this October for the first time up to Manchester, just to go to the People's History Museum, some of the sites to do with the suffrage movement, because that comes up in both courses there as well. So that's a new trip that we will be running, all things being well as well. We have regular visiting speakers and lecturers from universities like Royal Holloway and the University of Brighton to come in and speak about areas of expertise relevant to your courses, and also to give you a bit of an idea about studying history at university too. So just to give you a bit of a flavour. So this is the last time we could run those trips in 2019. Hopefully we'll have some fresh photos sooner rather than later. But just some examples, I've got some pictures of our last group that went out on the residential trip in Paris. It was a very, very hot week. The weather was really, really warm, as you can probably guess, at Versailles, out of the Eiffel Tower, those kind of sites there. And in Berlin, slightly less warm, at the sort of key sites linked to the Cold War history there as well. So just briefly, before we go on and have a look at have a go at our little sample lesson, I also just want to talk to you guys about some of the practical details that we often get asked about too. So in terms of how the course is taught, so you have so essentially you have 2 double lessons a week, essentially. So you would have essentially 2 hours of Tudors and 2 hours of French Revolution if you did the early modern, or 2 hours of British Empire and 2 hours of Cold War if you did the modern course per week. Now, both courses are taught simultaneously, so you don't start with the British Empire and then do the Cold War, for example. You would have them running alongside each other there. And you would have a separate teacher for each unit. So you'd have your Cold War lessons for your Cold War teacher and your British Empire lessons for your British Empire teacher, or your Tudors teacher and the French Revolutions teacher there. So that kind of runs alongside each other quite separately in these kind of double lesson blocks every week. In terms of the kinds of things that we do, lots of contemporary sources and extracts from historians, group work, presentation, lots of class discussion. So in terms of my lessons, just like I just taught today, we had a little class debate on some of the big questions we've been looking at. We had a bit of a reading of some texts and answering some questions on them and discussing them as groups, etc. So that sort of activity, which you may well be used to from studying history at GCSE, there's a lot more of that as well. And in terms of what makes a successful student at history at A-level, so obviously being interested in the subject is really, really important. Being organised, there's lots of resources and booklets we're giving out, so keeping a handle on those is really important. Really important, I really want to emphasise the importance of reading and writing. We do a lot of it, and it's the main way that you get assessed. So as long as you feel like you're happy working that way, that's a really important thing for knowing if you're going to be successful at the course or not. And being eager to debate, there's a lot of discussion. We know a lot of history is about sharing ideas, about debating ideas, etc. So again, if you like doing that sort of thing, this may well be the course for you. And in terms of our results, so last year, obviously, we were very pleased with the results we got. So in terms of A star to B, we had sort of 70% at the modern course and 66% at the early modern course. A star to C, 100% at modern and 98% early modern there. And then everyone across the board, everyone passed the A level overall. So again, that's been sustained over the past few years. So we have a nice record of success here, and lots of things put in place by the department to support people to ensure they get those grades they want to go on to the next stage. And speaking of, in terms of what history can do for you, in terms of your kind of trajectory and your future plans. So one of the things about history that it's a facilitating subject. So it's not a subject which will lead you directly to a career, like, for example, say taking law might be, but it's a subject which opens lots of different doors. It's also a subject which employers and universities like and value because of the skills that it gives to students. So studying history allows you to kind of weigh up arguments, make decisions about them and judgments. It allows you to helps you learn the skills of making a case, supporting your ideas with evidence, communicating those ideas both verbally and in writing there. And it's generally seen as one of those kind of really good value academic subjects, which Russell Group universities, other employers just like to see, which shows some really good skills on the part of the students who take it. And in terms of, just quickly, in terms of the sort of destinations, the majority of our students go on to go to university. Many of them study history, but others study different courses like law, looking at English, classics. Some go on to do politics, sociology. Some students who've taken other A-levels on the more scientific bent go down that route, but just have history there as an additional subject there as well. And in terms of the careers data, we've had people in the past, alumni, who've gone in to join the civil service, who've gone into legal careers, who've gone into things like business and marketing. So it's a subject which can open all sorts of doors, and gives you lots of options, particularly if you're sitting here thinking, I'm not exactly sure what I definitely want to do, but I know that I like this kind of subject and I like this kind of area. That's the sort of the useful things to be thinking about there. Okay, so that's the broad outline of the course and the introductory stuff I wanted to go to talk to you guys about. Obviously, if there's any questions, do pop them in the Q&A box and we will have a look at those at the end and I will answer any of those questions that you have. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a little bit of a sort of mini lesson. Now we're focusing here on the early modern course and we're focusing on one of the less familiar bits, which is the French Revolution, because it's quite an interesting topic and it's one that you guys might not be familiar with, so you might want to find out a bit more about it. So the question that we're going to be looking at is this: why was there a revolution in France in 1789? Now, this is something that a lot of historians have debated, so I'm not going to expect you guys to come up with a definitive answer at the end of the session, but it's a really interesting question to think about and the kind of question that we would wrestle with in our history lessons at the college. So you guys have been sent in advance of this session a series of sources to look at. So you have those in front of you now, either on a screen or if you've got a hard copy in front of you, that might be even better. I'm going to ask you guys to look at those sources and make some decisions about them, do some votes and some polls about them so that we can have a little bit of a chance to get your views there as well. So let's start off then. We're just going to have a look at one of the sources that you've been given collectively. I'm just going to talk to you about this source, and I'm then going to ask you guys to have a think about what that source can tell you. Because one of the things that we do in history A-level lessons regularly is we look at actual primary evidence from the period, so things that that have come from the time period that we're studying, and we look at them, and the main thing we're interested in is finding out what can they tell us about what's happening at the time. How can they help us answer some of the questions, like the question we're looking at today about why a revolution in France happened in the first place. So I'm just going to talk to you about this source, and this is one that I use with my year 12 students in classes when we look at some of the causes of the revolution in 1789. So in front of you, you can see, and hopefully you've got a copy of it on your the source sheet you were sent as well. You can see a table. And this table here has details of bread and the wage earners budget between 1788 and 1789. Now, this is quite interesting because this is a source which relies a lot on numbers and things like that, which some of the students really love, and some of the students are a bit like, oh, we have to look at numbers there. But it's really fascinating what we can find out from it. So if we have a look at our table here, you can see the first column. We've got some details about the occupation of the people that we're looking at here. So we've got 4 different groups of people. All of them are living in Paris in the 1780s. So we've got labourers in Rebellion wallpaper works. So this is a factory which makes wallpaper. We've got people who are working as labourers in the building trade. We've got people who are working as masons, so stone carvers, again in construction there. We've got people who are working as locksmiths, carpenters, etc. So we know who we're looking at here. Now in the second column, we've got here some details about their daily wage. And this is how much money they get paid per day. And it's called the wages in sous. So a sous is essentially one of the types of coinage or types of currency that's used in France. So we've got livre and sous. So sous are like pence, essentially, there. So we can see here, our labourer in the Rebellion wallpaper works is being paid 15 sous per day. Our builder's labourer, 18. Our journeyman mason, 24. And our journeyman locksmith or carpenter is being paid 30. So that's how much money they're being paid every single day. Now, in the next 2 columns, we've got another set of numbers. Now, these numbers relate how much money that each of these groups or members of these groups are spending on bread as a percentage of their income. So there are 2 different sets of figures here. So you can see here, we've got the first column in August 1788. That's when bread is priced about 9 sous per day. And you can see, therefore, if we look at the column below, that for our labour in the Rebellion wallpaper works, that means that bread is costing 60% of his income. The building labouring people, is 50% of their income. The mason, 37%, and the locksmith and carpenters, 30%. So that's the percentage of how much money they are having to set aside each day to buy bread, just bread. Okay, if you then look at the other column right at the end, we've got here on February to July 1789. So this is right on the cusp of the revolution breaking out. Bread is now priced at 14 sous. So we've doubled in price, effectively, or almost doubled in price, effectively. Now, let's look at the percentages. We can see here that for our labourer in the wallpaper works, that's now 97% of their income being spent on bread. And we can see here the other people, we've got 8%, 60%, and 48%. So that's how much money, the percentage of how the daily wage they're having to put aside each day to buy bread, essentially. Okay, so just now I've talked you through that particular source. We've got lots of information from this source, but what we want to think about here is what that tells us about the causes of the French Revolution. So what sort of things can we learn from this source? What could it tell us? What sort of things could we not learn from this source? What might it not tell us? So I'm going to give you a chance to make some decisions yourself. You've probably already got your minds whirring on this already. So we're going to launch the first poll now, if we could, which is going to have multiple choices. And you can see here that there are various things that you can say that this source could tell us. And there are things here that source might tell us and the source might not tell us. So what I want you to do is I want you to click as many of those things that you think this source can actually tell us. So you don't just pick one, you can pick multiple ones here. So go through, have a think, can this source tell us about that? Can it not tell us about that? And have a go at clicking them. I'm just going to give you another sort of minute or so to have a think about that and just cast your votes there. See the votes coming in. That's exciting. Ooh. Okay, should I give you about 10 more seconds on this? Actually, we'll make it 20 seconds. Actually, give you a bit more time. Rushing you. Okay, let's pause it there. Right, okay, so let's have a look here. So can everyone see the results here? So let's just have a quick look through. So the first thing that people have said, a lot of people, 62% of you said that this table could tell us why workers in Paris might be angry. That is absolutely right. So all of these people on that table were people working in Paris. And personally, I would be quite angry if I was paying 97% of my income on bread. Nothing else, just bread. What else can you buy once you've spent 90% of your income on bread? You can't really buy any new clothes, you can't really buy any other food, you can't even pay your rent. I mean, that's ridiculous. So yeah, so that's definitely correct. Other things that people have said, levels of inequality are like in pre-revolutionary France. That is also correct. Definitely, because we can see here, even amongst these people who are working in France, you've got some people who are doing a lot better than others and who are therefore have more of their money that they can keep and spend on things other than bread. If we want to kind of expand on that, we can think, okay, well, here are the people who are working in France who are spending a lot of money on and having a lot of their pay taken up on bread. What other social groups might there be? What other sort of problems might be caused here? Other things that people have said that are correct, that's the economic situation of pre-revolutionary France. Again, this can tell us a lot about that too, because we've got here some really lovely information about what's happening for people who are at the sharp end of the economic situation in France, the people who are experiencing hot price rises. We've got bread doubling in price for some reason in the case of a year. We've got the people, what the impact that's going to be having on working people. We've seen the fact their wages aren't going up because they're getting the same wage but spending almost double the amount on bread. That's telling us something about the economy of France in this period there. Now, some of the ones which this source can't necessarily tell us about. So some people have said why peasants across France might be angry. Now, again, I can see why you might have said that for similar reasons to the first response that you guys put in. The key thing here is if we look at the occupations, these people aren't peasants. They're not people working the land. They're not farming. So if we wanted to find out about peasants, we might have to try and find some other evidence and other information there as well. And things like the king's attempt to pass economic reforms, again, this doesn't necessarily give us a lot of info about economic reforms. We know there's an economic problem. We don't necessarily know what's being done about it, if anything. And then finally, spending by the king and his court at Versailles in pre-revolutionary France. Again, there's not a huge amount of information about that, or if any information about that there as well. So there are three really interesting things that we can find out from this source. We can find out a lot. There are also some things that we would need extra evidence and extra sources to find out about here. And this is, again, some of the things that you guys would get used to looking at sources and thinking, what can they tell us, but also what can't they tell us, what we're going to need more evidence on. Okay, so what we're going to do now is, if we're just going to move on. Okay, so what I'd like you to do here is, I think we've worked out then from that source that one of the causes of the French Revolution is something to do with the economy. There's obviously some problems. There's obviously going to be people angry about the fact that they are having to spend so much money on bread, that their economic situation isn't good. What I'd like you to do now, guys, is I'd like you to have a look at some of those other sources that you've been sent. So we've got a whole sheet of different artifacts or images and pictures about this period. I'd like you to have a quick look at them and see if you can think, are there any other causes that we can look at or we can find out about the cause of the French Revolution from these sources? Anything aside from the economy that might have caused this revolution based on those sources that you've looked at? And once you've got some ideas, put them in the chat and we'll have a look at them. So I'm just going to give you about sort of 5 minutes or so to have a look at that and have a think about those, and just jot your ideas down in the chat as soon as they come to you, and then we'll have a look at them. Just let you guys type away for the moment. Whilst you do that, whilst you're doing it, just to quickly sort of talk you kind of through this. Again, as you're typing, this is standard sort of stuff that we'd look at or we do in a history lesson. So you'd be given some material to look at. You'd be asked firstly to find out what it can tell you, but also it's a good sort of like stimulus for discussion. So what, based on this kind of source, do you think might be an answer to the questions like, why was there a revolution in France? How can we build up a big picture from putting all of the sources and what we can find from them together? And again, this might be something that you guys are quite used to doing based on your GCSE courses. I'm sure you all have questions on primary sources here. So this will be something that will be quite familiar to you from that. So I'm just going to give you another couple of minutes to put those ideas in, and then we'll have a nice flick through and see what we've got. Okay, just one more minute, guys. Those ideas in as soon as they come to you. Okay, everyone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to get the chat up. I'm just going to have a quick look and see what we've got here. So I'm going from the bottom here. Oh, lovely. So this idea about lots of I'm seeing, woo, I'm going through lots of ideas about the lack of economic stability. I can see here inequality, absolutely. Large amounts of money and land owned by a small amount of wealthy people. That's really important. So other things here, going upwards a little bit. So this lack of social conscience towards the lower classes, definitely. Class system, yep. This idea about inequality is really important. Yep, debt, really important there. The lead that, so you know, France is going bankrupt by the by 1789 because of all the debts they put together here. Yes, this idea about wasting money, lots of stuff about money here. Luxuries, yes, looking at those pictures of Versailles, an awful lot of money being spent on the court by the aristocracy. The monarchy, yep. The poor paying lots of taxes and the monarchy using that to kind of buy luxuries, etc. Attitudes towards the poor, definitely. Really good. I'm seeing lots of really good ideas about inequality here. An indulgence, debt, excellent. Class division, wonderful. Yeah, you're really picking up these key ideas here. I think also I'm getting a theme here in some of your responses about this idea about attitudes as well. This sense of the poor people feeling that they're being looked down upon. I think that's really important too. There, definitely. Yeah, brilliant stuff here. Wonderful. Excellent. So I've got a point here about the lettre de cachet. So this idea that the king could just imprison someone at will. Again, a really important point. This idea about the king having so much authority that he can almost act as a tyrant here, or at least be perceived to be acting as a tyrant here. Absolutely right, definitely. Yeah, lack of fair trials, the king being manipulated, the king manipulating the justice system. Lovely, brilliant. Yeah, I'm just looking through here. Yeah, decided about almost being a dictatorship. Excellent. Yeah, I'm just looking through here, and you guys have really got spot on these ideas about sort of this social inequality, class differences, extravagance here by the various by the monarchy and the court at Versailles. This idea about too much authority on the part of the king, him sort of abusing his authority. These are all absolutely valid things that we discuss and talk about as causes of the French Revolution, and they're things that we look at in depth and address and assess how far they are important in bringing about these events in 1789. So it's really good that you can already kind of identify those from those sources there. Okay, so this brings us then to our next task. So once we've identified the causes of a particular event, one of the next things we need to do is we need to make decisions about them. So in, for example, the essays you'll be set throughout the course and on your exam papers at the end, you're often asked, okay, here is an event like the revolution in 1789. Here is one cause of that event. How far is that the most important cause? Or are there other causes which are going to come that are playing a role and perhaps might be more important than the one that we've identified? So this idea about thinking about the relative importance of causes is something that you guys will probably already do as students of history, but you'll definitely do once you carry on to do history at A level. So in order to kind of think about that, one of the things that we get students to do is to think about, okay, well, what makes a cause important versus another cause? So kind of questions you've got to ask yourself are, firstly, is one cause seeming to lead on to all of the other cause? Is there a cause which seems to be the thing that's kind of kicking everything else off? Does one cause seem to have a longer term impact? So is that having an effect that's lasting for a much longer time than some of the other causes? Is one cause having a more kind of like general effect on across the whole population, or is it just affecting a small group? And is one cause seem to be the thing that's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back, that's kicking off being a trigger for change or for any key events? Those are all things you can think about when you're assessing the relative importance of causes. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to have a think about what the most important cause is based on the ones that you've identified today. So we're just going to load up our next poll for you guys to vote in. So that should be launched. Excellent. So you can see here we've got so about 5 key causes here. So social inequality, which you guys have identified, economic crisis, royal spending, the king's absolute power, and the actions of revolutionaries. I would like you to pick the one that you think is the most important, based on what we've learned so far, or from those sources, based on those thinking points I've just raised with you. So again, I'm just going to give you about sort of a minute or so to think about that and make your decision. See, votes are already coming in. People are straight off the mark on that one. Just going to give you 20 more seconds on this, guys, to cast your vote if you have not already done so. Okay, I think, oh, yeah, excellent, lovely. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the poll results here. So we've got a clear winner. Lots of you think that social inequality in France is really, really important. And certainly, I think you'd find a lot of people currently studying A-level here would agree with you on that. So we look a lot at the estate system in France, the division between the clergy, the aristocracy, and what is known as the third estate, i.e. everyone else, and how society is structured to favour the first and second estate and disfavour the third estate, and why this causes so many problems in the run-up to 1789. So it's definitely a big factor. Some of you have gone into the economic crisis, and again, this is something that we look at in a lot of detail. So the events leading up to revolution in 1789, as there are a lot of details about attempts by Louis to tackle the debt and also to tackle some of the economic problems afflicting the country, but how all these attempts by the monarchy fail, and this kind of leads the run-up to the meeting of what is known as the Estates General, which is kind of like a parliament in 1789, and how that then feeds into an overall revolution. Some of you have put royal spending at court. Definitely, that certainly affects how people see the monarchy, and it certainly affects the status of the monarchy, particularly when you combine it with the economic crisis. Some of you have mentioned the king's absolute power here. Yep, so this resentment at the king's absolutism and some of the challenges to that. No one's voted for the actions of revolutionaries. Well, again, it'll be interesting to see, those of you who choose to study the French Revolution with us, it'll be interesting to see whether your views on that change or not. But definitely some really good ideas here. And thank you so much for engaging with those sources so well and kind of engaging with that kind of debate. It's brilliant stuff. Okay, lovely. Okay, so just to quickly round up then, before we have the Q&A session. So everything we've just done there is very, very similar to the standard sort of things that you guys would do in a lesson, albeit compressed a little bit because of the timings that we've had. But yeah, you would routinely, for example, look at a source collectively, discuss what we can find out about it. Then I would ask people to reflect upon it, discuss it, draw conclusions. You'd routinely be given material, primary evidence material from a period, and be asked to kind of infer stuff from that, draw conclusions from it. We'd routinely then use that to feed into big discussions or debates about what is a more important cause of a key event, etc. So this is exactly the kind of thinking that you'd be doing in a sort of compressed respect of the same kind of thinking and activities you'd be doing in an ordinary lesson in the course. And that applies not just to the French Revolution course, but to all of our courses: Tudors, British Empire, Cold War. You'd be engaging with similar big questions there and engaging with primary material in the same kind of way. So what we're going to do now is there's a bit of time now to discuss some questions that have been coming through to us as we've been doing this session. If you have anything else you want to ask, please again just put that in the Q&A and we will hopefully get through a chance to answer all of them. So I've just been having some questions handed to me as we've been going through. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read them out and give you guys some responses to them right now. The first one here. So this is a question about support. So specifically things about support for students who find presenting in front of people slightly anxiety inducing there. Now, in terms of, I'll start with the specific thing raised here in terms of presenting. Most of the presentations that we do in lessons, you wouldn't necessarily have to be the person speaking. So we ordinarily would, for example, have a group where I'd get you guys to work on a particular topic. And ordinarily we ask the groups to choose their own speakers. I wouldn't necessarily force anyone to make the presentation if they didn't want to there. And if someone came to me in advance and said, I really don't want to speak publicly, but I'm happy to contribute to the group kind of behind the scenes, working out the response, that would be absolutely fine. So in that kind of scenario, we do presentations, but don't worry, if you really feel that you would find that difficult, you wouldn't necessarily have to be the person speaking there. More generally, in terms of the college, their pastoral team are absolutely amazing. And so, for example, if we have students who have, for example, some any sort of problems with anxiety or any other sort of problems which might affect how their experience of lessons, then we are always told about that in terms of what we need to know to help you out, and we are used to making accommodations for students based upon what their needs are. So really, in terms of broad support, the college is really supportive. There's a lot of pastoral support, but obviously in terms of specific things like tasks in history lessons, all you would need to do would be to speak to me or any of your teachers, and we would be absolutely happy to accommodate you and make any adjustments as needed on that. The next question I've got here: could we take both courses as two separate A levels? I'm afraid you can't. I know I'm really pleased at the enthusiasm that displays, but alas, you have to choose one of them. I'm afraid you have to pick either the modern or the early modern course. And I'm afraid we have occasionally had questions before about mixing and matching. Unfortunately, we can't do that either, because the exam board makes have certain requirements of us. So, for example, we have to make sure you cover over 200 years of history in a course. We also have to make sure that you cover both Britain and outside of Britain in a course here. So we can't allow people to mix and match, I'm afraid, nor I'm afraid can we allow people to do two history A levels. As interesting as I personally would be, I would find that. Unfortunately, that's not something we can do. But so yeah, it's a difficult choice to make. So do ask if you want any more information about making the choice, but I'm afraid it's a choice that you will have to make at some point before you join us there. Next question here: if we did practice questions at home, could they be marked by a teacher as prep for exams so we can see where to improve in areas of progress? Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, in terms of preparing students for the exams, well, the first thing that we do every half term is a key assessment, and that is based on an exam question drawn from past papers, etc. And routinely in history, aside from the first key assessment, we get you all to do it under some form of exam conditions. So you would do most of your key assessments under time conditions in lessons, and we would sort of add in support at the start and take away support as you go along. So by the time you go and sit in the exam hall, you will have had plenty of opportunities to do practice questions. You'll also have had your progression exams at the end of your first year, mock exams, which the upper sixth are just doing right now, plus other kind of assessment moments there as well. Obviously, if you want to do more than that, again, we're very used to having students sending in questions for us, and we're always happy to mark them. We also do things like plus sessions, which are kind of support lessons for students if they're, for example, finding a particular part of the course difficult. They can come and join us in the plus lessons, and we often again look at exam questions there. So fear not, there are plenty of opportunities to answer exam questions, both formally but also informally, giving them to the teacher as well there too. Okay, exams. Will we be given a brief revision list or expected to revise everything? Will everything be on the exams or similar to GCSE papers? Now, I'll deal with the first question, the first part of the question first. You will be given revision packs routinely, where you'll be given lists of topics, for example, and other guidance as to what to revise. We also run revision sessions in terms of in the Easter holidays for the upper sixth, and we often devote lessons to revision in the run-up to progression exams and to the sort of final exams. So yes, you'll be given a lot of guidance about what to revise. Now, in terms of everything being on the exams, normally, yes, everything that's been covered in both the examined units, so that would be the Tudors and the French Revolution or the British Empire and the Cold War, could appear on the exams. This year has been slightly different because obviously because of COVID, we've been given a list of some things which are going to appear on the exams and some things which aren't. That may not happen next year. Again, it depends upon the circumstances. It may not happen when you come to sit your exams. We may have returned to normal by that point. Even for the current upper sixth, who have got a list of subtopics which will appear on their exams and some which won't, a lot of the topics in history are so linked to each other that they can focus their revision on the topics which they know will appear, but even they can't entirely ignore all the other topics as well, because it kind of links into each other too. So yeah, what I would say is assume for the moment, if all things continue towards normality, that all of the examined topics could potentially appear on the exam papers there. Okay, okay, next question. How much time do you spend on coursework or out of lesson time? So in terms of the coursework, so what we do, the coursework teaching, we devote the first term of your upper sixth to teaching you the content for the coursework and then helping you guys and supporting you in writing it. And you'll then write that over, or finish writing it over the Christmas holiday, and that'll be that coursework done there. Now, in terms of outside of lesson times, we would normally recommend that you would be devoting at least a few hours a week to your coursework outside of lesson time there. So normally we say you should be doing about sort of 4 to 5 hours a week outside of your lessons on each of your subjects anyway. So a lot of that would be devoted to your coursework in that term that you'd be working on it in that first term of your upper sixth year there. And how much work to home to prepare for lessons? So yeah, again, in terms of, we have homeworks. We also have this thing called structured study, which often involves preparing for lessons as well. Collectively, they come to approximately 4 hours a week outside of lessons there. So it's about sort of like, 50% of your time is going to be in lessons, 50% of your time is going to be working on switch outside of lessons as well there too. Okay. How many people are in a class? So normally we have between sort of like 18 and 20 in a class. So if I think about my largest classes this year have been about 20 students in them there. My smallest class has got about sort of 16 in it. So that's kind of the normal average. Your class size will fall between those two sort of like numbers there. Okay. How much roughly would the residential trips cost? Again, it depends upon things like kind of insurance, travel costs. It's been a while since we run them, because obviously the last time we ran them was in 2019. Normally it was about £250 to £300, that kind of that sort of ballpark figure. The domestic trips obviously are sort of like slightly less expensive. We're talking sort of like £30 for the recent British library trip there. Obviously, the college does do bursaries for external trips as well to support students who might otherwise not be able to go on them. And obviously, if students are eligible for that, that's going to be a really good way of supporting students going on those trips too. Do we go through what the exam boards are looking for in our answers? Yes. So in terms of the feedback, for each assessment we do, we give you the exam board's issued mark scheme. We look through that when we review the work, so you can identify where you're working well, which bits, elements that you're kind of doing well on, which bits you need to work on there. So yes, you'll be very familiar with what the exam board requires of you as you go through the course. Is course completed by hand or on computer? It's on computer. So you would be typing your 3,500 words essay rather than handwriting it. Most students handwrite their examined responses. Obviously, if you have, for example, concessions, or you feel you need the concessions and you want to use a computer in the exams, then learning support will kind of look into that with you. If you already have that as a concession for GCSE, you can normally have that taken onto A-level as well. Okay, I've got a couple here. Is there support for essay writing technique? Yeah. So there's a routine support in the lessons where before each assessment we would prepare you for it and help you with the technique that you need to use. But also we have these plus lessons that I mentioned, which are about an extra hour a week. You can come in, and we often focus on essay technique, exam technique there as well. So yes, there's plenty of support for essay writing technique too. And how different are the essays to GCSE style questions? Essentially, what you're asked to do that might be different is you often have to go into a bit more depth than you might cover in a sort of GCSE style question. Also, the other main difference is you're given a bit more freedom to decide the structure of your essay. So, for example, if you've got like a sort of extended GCSE question, you might be, for example, asked to decide what's the more important cause of the two bullet pointed causes, for example. Whereas a essay question at A-level might be a bit more broad and might be like, okay, what do you think is the biggest cause of a particular event overall? And that's where you'd have to make some decisions based on what your knowledge is about that there. So, and again, we would be giving you a lot of support about how to approach those questions. We do a lot of practice questions in lessons as well there. Yes, okay, I think that's all the questions that have come through. So hopefully that was useful to you guys. Again, just to kind of just to do the final sort of thing here, we will be sending a recording of this session out to you all. There's also going to be a quick feedback survey, which we find really, really useful if you would just take a minute or so to fill that in, just so we know what things you found useful about this, what any extra elements you'd like added to it for next time. But again, thanks so much, guys, for giving up your time this evening to learn about the history A-level. I'm really looking forward to seeing more of you as you kind of go through the application process and the induction process. And yeah, looking forward to seeing some of you in our classrooms come September. So thanks very much, guys. Yeah, I think that's the end of the session. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone.